If you want to work with hand planes, or really just wood in general, you need to have an understanding of how to read the grain. Whether you're talking about a board that's already surfaced like this, or maybe you've just split a wedge out of a log. Being able to read the grain is absolutely essential. And this is one of the things that I'm constantly hearing from students of mine at the hand tool school. Since 2010, it's the same questions over and over again. I'm getting tear out here, I'm getting a tear out there, I can't get my plane to work, I'm not sure which way to follow the grain. Reading the grain is kind of that first step to fix a lot of the problems, from planing to sawing to chiseling. Well, we've all seen those demonstrations where the guy is, quote, teaching you how to plane, use a hand plane, and he's pulling up these long shavings and everything's just working wonderfully. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't work with boards like that. None of my boards have nice, continuous grain, all flowing friendly in the same direction. For that matter, I might find a section that works great on one side of the board, and then I switch to the other side of the board and I'm getting tear out because the grain is changing directions on me. Well, I want to teach you a trick that allows you to read the grain no matter how squirrely it is, no matter how figured that board is, how crazy that jungle wood is. This tip, for lack of a better term, kind of trumps all that squirrely grain. And the secret lies right here in the end. So traditionally, when we read the grain of a board and to determine which way to plane the face, we look at the edge. And that generally will help guide us. But in a perfect world, all the grain rises gently in one direction. But real world boards don't do that. And if you look at this piece of figured redwood, you can see I've got grain rising this way, rising back on me, rising straight up. It changes directions like 6 times along the length of the board. The opposite edge is a little bit more controlled, but even then it rises one way, curves, and rises the other direction halfway up the board. So it's really difficult to determine which way to plane. And you can look at this and think, okay, the grain on this side is rising this way till about this point. So I plane from here to here, and then I reverse and go from here to here. That still leaves you with this little section in the middle that's going to cause some tear out, and it can be really kind of cumbersome to switch directions, and even then it doesn't always work. Instead of looking at the edge grain to determine which way to plane, look at the end grain to see which direction the fibers are running vertically, or maybe not vertically. So in this case, I've got a pretty closely quarter sawn board where the grain is running almost vertically, but it is leaning slightly this way to this side of the board. So the grain is running straight up and down, but kind of falling over one way. Instead of thinking of planing this way or this way, skew the blade so that we're planing in the direction the fibers are rising on the end grain. So I want to skew it so the fibers again are rising up and over here. So I want to skew the toe in that direction. I'm not planing diagonally, I'm planing straight across, but I'm planing with the blade skewed in that direction. And the reason for this is the fibers are running up out of the board. If my tips of my fingers are the individual fibers, and they're leaning this way. As the blade makes contact with them, those fibers don't necessarily care whether they're leaning one way or another, but if they're all leaning this way and the blade hits it at an angle, it's going to plane it smoothly. So in a case of a really wicked board like this with reversing direction all over the place, if I just plane straight across, I'm going to start to get tearing, and you might be able to see it, maybe you can, maybe you can't, because it's heavily curled and the grain is doing this roller coaster ride. I'm getting smooth and tear and smooth and tear and smooth and tear. But if I skew the blade and I plane again, same direction along the board, but skewing in the direction of those ingrained fibers, I am eliminating that tear out. So you can see on this side of the board that I just planed straight across, I've got smooth and torn grain alternating. On this side where I've skewed the blade, I now have smooth grain throughout. A little bit more planing to do right in there, but all of this torn stuff that was here is now smooth. So then the converse could be said if I flip the board around and I plane this section that I just planed coming from here to here, if I go the other direction, but I now skew it, again, fibers are running up and off to my right. So if I'll go straight across the board, I again am getting tearing. All those fibers that are running against me, I'm getting tearing. So now I'm going to skew towards the direction that the end grain is telling me. When you skew like this, you get a little bit of rotation in the board. But it is smoothing out. And now I've got a completely smooth texture, no tearing. I just achieved no tearing by planing from here to here, and then I went the other direction and went from here to here. And by skewing in the direction, I got no tearing. So essentially, the method of looking at the edge grain to determine which way to plan on the face grain, we know it works. It's what we've been doing for years and years and years. But I think the trump card in this is the direction that you're seeing on the end grain, because I just demonstrated I could plane, from this end to this end, flip it around and plane exactly opposite that. As long as I maintain the skew of the plane in relation to the fibers on the end grain, I'm getting a smooth surface. I'm not saying ignore the edge grain, but when you have a board that's not cooperating, or you have a board that does this type of thing where it rises in one section of the board and drops in the other section of the board, trying to figure out which way to plane it, the tiebreaker in that is what direction the end grain is going. So it's very common. That's a heavily figured board, and I think with really figured boards, the direction of the grain on the end grain is really what we should look at most, because it's so crazy everywhere else. There's really no clear indicator. But if we look at like a normal board, this is a normal white oak board, and as you can see, I've got grain rising up and back down. It's forming a big circle. So it's rising up this way on one part of the board and rising up this way on the other part of the board. The end grain fibers are rising up and over this way. So regardless of whether I plane from here to here or here to here, I need to skew the toe of the blade this way. So if I'm going to plane from this end to this end, I need to skew the blade, again, fibers coming up this way, across this way. If I flip the board around and plane from this end to this end, I need to skew and go that way. And this is actually really helpful when you've got a piece like this that's mostly quarter sawn. If I look at the end grain fibers I've darkened in here, you can often get a lot of tear out on a board like this. And by paying attention to that skew direction and skewing and going straight across, and actually the more you skew it, the less tearing you're gonna get. And we've always said that skewing the plane can help with tear out. Well, we've talked about that in terms of lowering the angle of attack, like a switchback up a hill. In order to make that hill not be so steep, we do a switchback and we cut across it at a skewed angle. The skew is doing that, but what the skew is also doing is directing the vector, the force of the blade, to coincide with the direction of the fibers as visible on the end grain. And with real world boards where it's never the same grain direction from one end of the board to the other, always focus on the end grain direction, and you're going to end up with a tear out free surface. Now what you've just seen is an excerpt from a larger lesson that lives in the Hand Tool School library. Since 2010, I've been teaching woodworkers on 6 continents. I'm still looking for somebody in Antarctica. There's got to be a wood shop in McMurdo Station. If so, give me a call. We'll talk. There are thousands of hours of lessons, a whole bunch of different projects, and they're organized in different ways. If you're looking for a structured approach to give you a step-by-step curriculum on how to learn hand tools, well then our semesters are a good option for that. You can learn basic cabinetry like this tool cabinet, or you can learn wood turning in our wood turning semester, etc., etc. If you're just looking to build projects, maybe you just want to build this tool cabinet, we have a variety of projects. If you're looking for specific techniques and you really want to focus in on one technique, we have lessons, individual lessons that can be purchased. And then of course we have a subscription model that I call apprenticeship, where you get everything, every project, every semester, every technique lesson, every bit of print, all the sharpening lessons, everything since 2010, since the beginning, is available to you in a recurring subscription fee. It allows you to engage in what your best method of learning can be. What you just saw is a small example of what's available and becoming a member at the Hand Tool School. handtoolschool.net, or click the link below.